Okay, thank you all for coming out. Probably don't need this, but am I going into it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm probably more nervous to introduce Joan than I am to do my own poetry readings actually at this point. But I first met Joan Kane my last semester as an MFA student. I was living in Colorado, grew up on the East Coast, and was putting the finishing touches on what would become my first book, an exploration of family history, US assimilation policy, belonging, displacement. My quote unquote papers were in order, but I was still very much adrift, searching for my place in my own community along the Kodiak Archipelago and Aleutian Islands of Alaska. I didn't have any identifiable female role models, my mothers and sisters, of course, but they were on paths very different than my own. It was only my second trip to Alaska, when through her tireless efforts at building community and space for young Indigenous writers to gather, I found myself a guest in Joan's home, sharing traditional foods I had no access to down below. It was a rare and impossibly fulfilling meet your idol moment, as I had been studying her work avidly, and a true pivotal moment in my life. Don't want to be metaphor anymore, but drum, but map, Kane writes in The Angel of Yelling. But Joan has never been metaphor to me. Her poetry has been drum since the very first lines, and she herself has been map since that first meeting. Map of community, map of persisting, map of alchemy, map of motherhood. When asked to blurb Dark Traffic, I found the book so overwhelming in its power, I could hardly contain my response, though the result still pales. From my blurb, if consolation is the small gesture of sound, Joan Naviyuk Kane writes defiantly into the wind, the howl and the dive through a sequencing of sonic dissonance, haunted and haunting landscapes of earth and body made earth along undercurrents of violence to invoke the poem as reckoning. Oscillating between presence and absence, mother, daughter, woman, inhabiting the rift into language and grit, Kane reveals the ways we are made and made again. Dark Traffic is the poet at her most vulnerable and most powerful. That, I suppose, is the trouble with superlatives. Joan Naviyuk Kane continues to astound, fully present, full of fury, full force of the lands and the ones she is named for and carries. To write an introduction that would do justice to a power such as Kane's is an endeavor as futile as trying to explain a poem using any language other than the poem itself. The poems speak for and through the poet speaks for and through the poems. And in that Ouroboros is nothing less than the whole world ever and always becoming. Yes, I can tell you the facts, and they are impressive. And before either of us break into tears, I'm going to skip them and tell you to read the book blurb that has these facts where I pulled them from. But the language of the North is storied. In the North, there are stories of women scorned who hold our sustenance in their hold hand, where they persist at the bottom of the sea. Elsewhere, a woman falls from the sky and solid ground is pulled from the deepest reaches of the sea. In Kane's poems, we are carried on the sound of words, the sounds of a home at once distance and carried through these utterances. These poems are a conjuring of that solid ground, an evocation of the sea's deep gifts. Is the wave, the rough sea, omen or evidence? Kane names and conjures, reckons and rages, but do not mistake her fury for hysteria. We seem to give all the best roles in history to the men. We do not recall women as lightning rods of power, as shamans. At best, they were midwives, we might note dismissively, as though it were not awesome work. Maybe healers, but too often we are relegated as mothers with a lowercase m. To be a poet, as Kane is a poet, is to be a medium of knowledge, not the will and intention of another absent father, but the patient and insistent needs teased from that which is corporeal and no less wondrous. Her gristle, nothing but abundance. Her poems chart the landscape, or rather thread, rather net, through family, through kinship, through ruin, through language. No leaps of faith, but interminable grit. On and off the page, Kane stirs the waves and agitates still waters with the power, strength, and cunning of, quote, a woman armed with children dreaming, end quote. These poems are indeed islandic, someplace we can travel back to together if we have to, if we make it through these days, from another poem in the collection. And Joan Naviyuk Kane is the tireless sea that joins them. And I am forever in awe and gratitude for the privilege of moving in her waters. Please welcome Joan.
You know what I mean? I was already crying in the first paragraph, so let's hope that all is out of the way. Am I okay in the mic? Okay. At first, I want to say, Wanga ito Naviyuk, uwig mi urunga silikar mi urunga. I'm called for my namesake Naviyuk. I'm Joan Naviyuk Kane. My family, my ancestors, and my children come from Uwivuk and Quirk, King Island, and Mary's Igloo, Alaska. I also want to thank Grolier for hosting tonight. Of course, when I first showed up here in Cambridge 28 years ago, I didn't know that I would be celebrating eventually my 9th collection. I had a lot of stuff to get out of the way between then and now. I also really want to thank the memory of Ifani, who encouraged me when I came here to launch Milk Black Carbon in 2017 to continue to write poems in Inupiatun, to continue writing prose in my language, and to continue to make space for others. And I'm really grateful to Abby for that introduction. We last saw each other in Finland about a month ago, whatever. And also thanks to James and Bella. When they asked me, I think about a year ago, if I had any poems, I said at first no. Really was burnt out after many Zoom classes, I think like 41 that I taught during the pandemic. Teaching poems, but I realized the opportunity to really work with people who I trust and respect and admire, and I pulled it together. So anyway, that's enough for me. I will do my best with these poems. Thanks for coming out tonight too, and thanks for everyone on Zoom. I think as with many of my chapbooks, as soon as I get something done, I start revising right away. So if any of you have read this, you'll note that there's differences. I also want to thank many people who gave really generous advance praise for the book. I'm really grateful to all of them. As we know, blurbing is one of the, parts of the business. But I'm really grateful for their readership. It sustained me through what has been a very difficult year. And also just want to say thanks to everyone who's kept my mom in their thoughts. She is still in critical condition, hospitalized in Anchorage. And I offer this to her. And I also offer this in memory of Joseph Mangatuk, who passed on May 31st. And he is, if you don't know his work, he was the first Inupiat person to write a full-length collection of a full-length book. It came out in 1971. It's called Give or Take a Century. I worked hard with him to try to bring it back into print. It's been out of print since then. But he also took a lot of time with me and my kids our last year in Anchorage to really offer my children the connection to my grandfather, who he carved with and learned how to carve with in Nome. In the 1950s and 1960s. Okay, here's the poems. Don't run out. Real and white as snow. Have they forgotten starting over and over? The swan crossing with a dark tide southward to the sound. Not too far off. Firework and blast of something hard to reach and harder to escape. And now, remembering how, without him, a woman's quarrel, it passes into a quarrel with no one. This is one of the longer poems I've written, maybe ever, which is to say it's 2 pages. And a lot of it comes from a trip I made with Elliot Ackerman and Jennifer Croft, Christopher Merrill, and also Jeffrey Brown to Ukraine in November and December of 2015. So that's a little bit about the backstory of this poem. There was a fabulous translator, Joan Naviyuk Kane, who appears in the poem, and I've been following as much as I can with everything that's been going on in Ukraine since I left, but especially in the last 2 years. Anyway, a hammer and drill bit to a pane of glass. I walk along a shore of salt and search for a sky reflecting blue all winter, though a mirror as it melts won't show what isn't there. And metal clapper on metal, and a lost photograph of the Ouroboros circling the bright days in Poltava and elsewhere, as she crouched astride of a tree where the eggs or Gogol's poppies inscribed with lines could empty nothing in supplication to the erased faces of the figures carted everywhere from the steps. And another translator in another translation, drunk with his many-headed fire and recalling the topple and raise and afraid of women armed only with hand-turned spoons, thatch, and our children dreaming of potency and releasing all of us from poisons. And another day in Kharkiv, after the blizzarding away, in the lobby of a constructivist hotel, someone held Plath's poppies, asked what if. It was, what if, they unblinded and could make me see. I was reading through this when James brought it over the other night with my glasses on, and I was like, oh, cool, I can see everything. But if I'm stumbling, it's because I'm wearing contacts, and I should have done that test first. This is a poem that appears first, or appears in the book in Inupiatin. You might feel like you know some of the words, and because a lot of them are loan words, especially from Russian and also English. Sakya, Kamekluk, Dairon, Mukaron, Mizu, Rupia, Danga, Sigjak, Sakala, Kakyanga, Marisik, Selak, Sakak, Aklak, Aklan, Aklaktunga, Wasik, Milak, Nerkak, Nalikak, Tamakluk, Misuk, Nyakosiun, Masak, Sakpun, Sakla, Sasak, Kamun, Dingmiazun. Here it is in English. Reclamation. Loafer, barrel, flour sack, soda pop, coffee, spirits, cigarette, sugar, host, pill, sailor, shotgun, something written, but also I am writing, wristwatch, soap, trousers, dollar, gummy sack, aspirin, pottage, rifle, bar of chocolate, clock, car, airplane. I started that poem when I was trying to write a list of sort of contraband or words that I thought I knew when I was my kid's age. I don't think they know any of those words now. Thankfully, nice to raise them in Cambridge these last 4 years. Okay. Oh, this one. The story behind this poem is that Camille Dungy asked me about a year ago for a poem in Inupiatun, and I took her very seriously, wrote a very personal poem in Inupiatun, and then about 8 months later she said, okay, now I need the English translation, and I was like, fuck. Okay. I was like, that's actually 2 poems. So I've actually written out the whole thing phonetically because I not only am having a hard time seeing, but also I don't want to get it wrong, especially for anyone on Zoom who has our language. Padik. Hula marunga agnoyo ingigia. Nigishanik ayugia agnoyo. Gabu shanga. Huriktuk. Pingak. Shaga. Pingak shaga. Sorry, I looked at the Inupiat and I'm like, that doesn't look right. Pingak shaga. Dununami. Naron. Dingmiach. Hula. Neo. Urato. It's terrible. I'm sorry, my phonetic translation. I didn't practice it enough times. Ipnik Hadok. Kungiya. Bidela. Sudela. Nunata im miok uva. Atarumok ima. Kiraw. Kiyuktok. Nunivaksa. Bamiuta. Palok. Igayulak. Alayu Niok. Kuzimak. Piknok. Mazu. Gavlak. Akpati yang tiktok. Surat. Suak. Miluratok. Kimeklok. Kungarlik. Padeksinak. Ikjurera. Kuvile runga. Uye Yula. I should have just read from the real orthography because that was harder than reading. A reading phonetically is reading harder than as it was written. Nervous, always nervous. Marrow. I am visiting Ahonoyok. I fear for her safety. To Ahonoyok I brought nourishment. I traveled through a wave and rough seas. She is trenchant. I fear for her. Remember how there used to be many birds at the back of the island? There is an image that has been reflected. I reach the end of it, my limit, my destination. All is depleted. There is nothing left. No land to be seen anywhere. Listen to that distant sound. Peregrine falcon, red fox, berries and greens growing to profusion from the profuse earth. Fireweed, cormorant, compressed freshwater ice, which is blue in hue, sorrel, wild rhubarb, tall cotton grass, wild potato, black bearberry, red phalarope, blueberries, fishroe, coltsfoot, bitter sourdock, sourgrass, woolly lousewort. Gather them. My eyes are brimming with tears. I, whirlwind. This is a poem called Letter from Austerlitz. I wrote it when I had a summer, my first summer without my kids ever, in 2021 when I was at Malay. It's edited down quite a bit. There's a companion poem to it in the next collection that's called Letters from Learned Men. Here's thank you.
Got you, Joan.
Yeah. This one is just called Letter from Austerlitz. So agates, ivory, without alliance, I was told we would not fill the air with our difficult musics. Always a mother and shame, and absent a worthwhile father. So I came to know what it meant to scratch fragments are the only form he trusts onto the page. Suddenly, I grew uncomfortable to be loved, to know what was wrong with the dream was wrong with the people. This is called Din. Confounded in other ways, I grew fluent. One distant writes, you were in my dream conjuring fire from some kind of spirits. Years have passed, and again, my mother asks why I station a burnt sprit on the ledge. Another lost me now on another ocean. I had a dream about you last night. We were on an island. shore, watching icebergs drift by. I will look back through a darkness I could have walked through alone. Sorry, some of the received language in this site also troubles me. And that last part is from the poet Trevino, or the last sort of received language is from the poet Trevino Brings Plenty. Okay, I'm halfway through. Turning back, I wish to be closer to my mother, to think of displacement in a different way, to part the bright green new growth of a plant she has asked me to gather. We never imagined so many years apart. I have no way to make amends. Set adrift, I wanted to stay near the shore of something familiar, but instead I traced the shape of Grolier, sea lovage, wild celery, with something other than my tongue. I wish for my family to be its own refuge, for the sorrow to become something islandic, someplace we can travel back to together if we have to, if we make it through these days. This poem is Anniversary. It's, yeah. Anniversary. He dreams himself a pool of oil, and I, his drowned wick, and wolf-like he looks down on me. Though my firstborn flew as his first passenger, and though later, when burning me through a summer of his sad avarice, not once did my heart drop as he pitched one steep turn after another. How is it that I have come to refuse my children close aboard the ship of his I myself would have never ridden? The one we knew he could use to leave and feared used already, indifferent, working banishment from meaning with the fury that to choose implies choice. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with the person whom this poem, the received language comes from, you'll know that there's no way I can imitate the booming bass of his hollering and screaming voice. So you'll just have to imagine that half of this poem is not in my voice and half of it is more or less. You'll have to figure out which half is half, maybe. The angel of yelling. I wasn't always this perfect. On the drumlin, burning swords and munitions will you waste? Text me when you can be nice, not a vortex of negativity. Resiliency exhausts me, don't want to be metaphor anymore, but drum, but map. I don't know what you mean by that, but don't really care to find out either. How to process information and also help people hear what you literally saw. I don't think you should date white people. Plunder, plover. It's not your fault it's not your kid's fault that their mother is an asshole. The recollection of such lost abundance. It's no fucking secret that every man in your life is abusive. A provocation, a way to speak to myself. I'm sorry, every man in your life is abusive, except me. It would be better if I could do the voice, but I've been trying for 45 years and I can't. What could not be vulnerable in such changing light? And what could anyone who has not found a sense of the enormous meaninglessness of individuality between the complex anticipation of the sea as it parallels the voluble insinuations of the river, thick with rich fish, flush with eggs, begin to understand that to lose one's land has nothing to do with storms. Submerged willow brush and a wolverine in a mother or a woman who would be one. She sees the others who will set to work, turning the bureaucracy of such vulgar tongues as driftwood series into the flaw of her throat, larger in circumference than the loss I will no longer measure palm by palm. If my kids were not playing Zelda or having are doing their Latin homework right now. They would be mortified for me to mention that my oldest kid, who's a freshman at Ringe, gave me a little lecture this morning about the proper use of the title of the book. And then I was like, maybe I'll include it. And he's like, maybe you don't. Anyway, so that's an intro to this poem, which is called, in which the poet agrees that being alive is a whole bunch of being wrong. And yes, I confess to a certain professionalism when it came to pissing off men, to a handful of ash and more intractable problems, overindulgence at times and yawn, increasingly tearful and fearful for my well-being, to stay over long betwixt foxglove and feverfew, ambivalent shades I care both ways, digitalis and parthenium, twee as fuck, meadow and rock crest too, beneath a grappling canopy of boreal trees leafing out, perhaps always unleaving. Allegedly, I no longer have time for illusions of the bitter sort. Shit is fucked. The south side of my contested yard suspired with a combination of trilled notes given in a long string. We called a gallop of redpolls when circumstances conspired like that. Someone wrote, I'm sorry to read what's in the letter. I hope things improve for you. He, too, has a friend named Rococo. Being alone can take its toll. A digression into Arendt here, her gesture toward the real seductiveness of evil. And I, banal as usual, mixed in with blokes of commerce and state, whose discursive assertions sway business is business and war is war into a beautiful, if fading, inconsistency of the rhetorical sort, and one in which we are all enchanted by the consonance of our own systems, values, and vacuums. Sometimes I take on the shit detail, a perfunctory assignment, but of course that's where you find the dissolute literati. Not Dover, not days before one boards the ferry from Abergwan to Rosslare Harbor. I'm supposed to get, at last, in this gray light, to the how, but still mire in the why. Don't let's forget the strand thick with earless seals on its shifting banks. I'm not sorry, too. There's mad game and truth, and true, the utility of my testimony's futile. The whole's sick, something other, something else, not a sum of its parts. And here's neither frog nor Fovea, nor another other thing other than mere principle of subtraction, and nor a junction, at best, somewhat badly signed. Blank, 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 positively give consent to everlasting banishment. I guess it would have been helpful for me to preface that with the fact that my dad, when I was a little kid, eager to have me read the work of women, had me read all of Hannah Arendt before I transitioned into this womanhood thing. So thanks to my dad, I guess. And also that poem was written, well, whatever. I can tell the backstory some other time. Anyway, all right. This is a poem called First. We both know who believed snow, who denied it, when you finally came to walk me to the river. I forget I am not pure, how little that part of the story ever matters. What matters, maybe, how long I had been waiting and with such impatience. At the end, I think I will know what pure means, what I meant to insist back into my blood, whatever it meant to want to live, whatever inevitable ruin, whatever it means, I'm not yours. So this book was supposed to be for me to exercise all the ghosts of my exes. And this one is really old. It's about my college sweetheart. And there's a story there too. Anyway, we both grew up down the street in Adam's house, and I a bit farther down the street at the Harvard Advocate, and he at the Crimson. Anyway, If he's on Zoom, which he may be, because we're actually friends. Infinitive. There's nothing sentimental in this forest, a squall, birch boughs sibilant, some hearth upwind glut with wet wood. You, taken with a fine polish, should have wed the woman you would have loved. Nothing in this forest. Sentimental, I dwelt once beneath a linden tree sprung up between leaves of mica, scaffolds, lanes of passing traffic. Its redolence stifling and flawless, conditional. I do not miss it. Torn from a tangled understory underfoot, a scud of club moss spores, blown, burns rapid. Right. This next poem, I did some writing for this AR/VR film called Once a Glacier, which got a lot of, I've never seen it. I don't have an AR/VR headset, and the person I was dating who had one, we broke up before I got to watch it. Anyway, it was everywhere this last year, and they asked me to write something for it, this very cool like dance performance with a lot of tech that I'm not even going to begin to describe or understand. So that's where this poem comes from, except for the title. On no longer being a carbon offset girlfriend. Inscribed with invisible language, new with mar and garble, I archive nothing but atmosphere. Such music is dry and sharp, and all the darkness I have grasped grows legible, either indifferent or nothing, like rivers and young ice as they flash, dazzling blue, blue-white. Once you made me envy you, your glut, confusion, bruised by every weapon or want, as cold tongues turned the land for life, mixing richness into the soil to raise one last forest for cambium to gargle and soothe. You struck root to brutalize and render a girl into something domestic, to consume to extinction, to leer at hair grass as it too loses its scale. If I had never ceded continents, how could I usher another diminishment, another gesture of change or repair in a dew world wet with gold or granite, of carved earth, thick with saplings in the heel of fireweed and sorrel rising from silted earth, turned by a composed, deliberate might. Compulsion thrives in a grid-girded world, as if to scar my skull, anarchic on its ruined face. But parsimony it smothers and bakes me as I erase cities, submerge countries, drowning the engines and braying machines of empire. My gristle, nothing but abundance, my inner rhymed familiar and serviceable as you skin my throat and make me bleed. As I funnel gas into a skiff as if at sea. This is in which the poems and poets agree that they are the result of choices they have made along the way. The silver of the lake caught in the net like a provocation, the translation under the writing. How long have you been running? I tried to answer, I'm still trying. A poem too holds secrets that it cannot tell. Fake people, fake pain. Anger only troubles like sorrow until it goes away. You wish you were home? Yes. But midiktok, it came unraveled. I used to think I preferred to dream with a man only after he bedded me. And then there are the real poems where the language creates its own tension, where the language reminds us to create a story and become part of it, to stay alive until we come back. I guess I should have said before that poem that the received language in there comes from the last male therapist that I had, counting him among my exes. All right, so this is the last poem, and that one a lot. Well, you know, I'm trying to keep it on time. All right. So this is the last poem. Thank you again for coming tonight, and thanks again to James and Bella, and I'm excited for Staircase Books And yeah, okay. Ex Machina. Rain, sundering snow, the man-shaped hole in her brain empties of hate as she combs a tangle of dark brown hair from the crown of child's head to whorl, blue curl, and tendril. The bruise beneath what's left of her greening back into benignity, and meanwhile the river gurgles aleatoric into the harbor past Nupealvik as it gorges on the remains of a great blue heron before the net catches her, until she is carried off the tarmac, tagged and banded, released hours later. Not bird strike, but another old danger eruptive and much heavier in her heavier in hand than an omen returned from the combine of book machine and assignment, a glib factory, compendium of forgetting. Different things have taught her to respond not to brutality with pettiness, and to set down the speculative weapons she may have raised in a time of cultural distress. Okay, thank you. Sure. Yeah, and I'll preface that by saying I totally forgot to take a beta blocker this evening. So I'm a little more nervous than usual, but yeah, I'm happy to take a Q&A or.
Do we have time for a few questions? Just want to say thank you, Joan, for the beautiful poems, and it was such an honor to work with you on this chapbook. And let's give Joan another round of applause. We have the chapbook for sale over here. Joan will be signing the chapbook. Thank you all for coming tonight. If everyone could please help just move your chairs up against a wall, I would be grateful. And we have another reading this Friday, believe it or not. So if you want to come back for another poetry reading, we do it about once a week here. Thanks again for coming.
CHABITNOY.